Hello, I'm Gina Clifford, and I'm here with my co-host, Louise Mowbray, and together we are in conversation. Today, we have a very special guest, Chris Mayer, who is the head of the English and Philosophy Department at West Point University, Military Academy, actually. And we are here to discuss the role of ethics and philosophy in artificial intelligence development as it applies to warfare. Chris, could you give us a little background into things that you're working on and your expertise, and then maybe a baseline definition of what you think ethics is as it relates to uh, military warfare? Thanks.
Okay. Well, Gina, Louise, thank you for inviting me today. It's great to be here. Just a bit about me. I'm an Army officer and a faculty member at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. I'm currently the head of the Department of English and Philosophy, and we teach three core courses that all cadets take: first year composition, literature, and an introduction to philosophy course. And then we also have our two majors, the philosophy major and the English major. And, cadets are able to choose those two majors amongst the many that we offer. I should note that what I say here today are my views and not the views of the Academy or the Army. So, in talking about ethics, when we talk about morality and moral principles, generally we talk about how we view, like, really how to live and interact with others. And sometimes those others are, in some people's views, just people. But I think most philosophers expand that to animals and the environment and really all living things, and how the moral principles that guide our interactions and what we see as right in interacting with others. And so ethics takes a step back and looks at those moral principles and and it actually examines them and produces theories of interacting with others, whether it's the environment or people. And so you have major strands of ethical theories like consequentialism, which makes judgments on the rightness of actions based on the consequences, whereas deontological views look at the nature of the actions themselves. And virtue ethics takes a look at the nature of the person, and looks at particular virtues: courage, humility, kindness, and those sorts of things. And there's more than those three, but those are kind of the main three that undergraduates are introduced to when they take a course.
That's really very human centric, just what you just described. So the challenge is you bring in artificial intelligence and you automate some systems that humans used to undertake in warfare. How do you bring ethics into artificial intelligence? I don't know if you have thoughts on how you bring that in as a philosopher and an ethics person, or how you enable others to do it through education.
It's interesting. Really, since the first days of warfare, there's always been a concern about what's fair and not fair in war. So the crossbow is seen as not fair because it enabled people to kill at a distance. And then as time goes on, you see the distance between the person who's engaging the target and the target becomes further and further, so that when you have airplanes shooting missiles, some have said, well, is that ethical, because you're the distance and the person the pilot isn't actually seeing the target and isn't guiding the missile. The missile itself is guided and makes I don't want to say a decision, but once the pilot engages the target, the missile actually follows and hits the target without the pilot guiding it. So in some ways, the idea of AI in warfare represents technology that again, people worry about that it's changing the nature of warfare. I think the differences with AI is that people often are concerned that AI will decide, advanced AI will make a decision on to engage a combatant, if that makes sense. And I think that's where people start to get concerned that in the pilot example, the pilot has made a decision to engage the target, and then the missile goes to that target. But the concern is that AI will make that decision, and then humans aren't making life and death decisions. AI is.
So that gets a little bit scary when you think about who is ultimately held responsible if something were to go wrong, and it's not a who anymore. It's an artificial intelligence that can't be maybe held to any kind of moral standard as humans are, right? We can't imprison an AI or
Right.
punish it. How is that? What is your perspective on how that could be handled in the future?
I think interestingly, I think it's going to parallel a lot our work with autonomous cars. And before we met, we talked a bit about autonomous taxis, and if that gets into an accident, who's responsible? Is it, you can't hold the taxi responsible, but I think there's different, like any situation where there's a leader involved and his or her soldiers performing a mission. You have to ask, what were the soldiers put in the right place and given the right guidance to perform the task, and was it the right task? And so maybe in some ways with AI guided weapons, you could ask the same thing. Did the leader make a mistake in putting the AI enabled weapon in an environment where it shouldn't have been, maybe in a crowded town? Or did the manufacturer promise something that couldn't be delivered? Just in the same way that if you got into an autonomous taxi and the manufacturer promised it could drive in the city without any issue, but it really couldn't, or maybe there was something about small children that run in front of it aren't sensed by the scanner, and it hits a small child. That seems to be the manufacturer's fault. Yeah, so I guess I would maybe ask you two, like, your thoughts on, because I think that's interesting too, on autonomous cars and vehicles, and what you think about that. So I think it's really closely related.
Yeah, I agree. Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, this is such a big topic. It really is. And I think that the interesting thing is, how do we prepare young people to go into any industry, and especially any industry where human life is at peril or at risk? And when it comes to warfare, there is there's a clear objective, and yet the question of weapons being able to decide through AI what the target is, or what weapons to deploy, or where to deploy them, I guess would need to rely on intelligence in the same way as where a car lands up being. Or, we're seeing so much development now around robotics, and I think we always understood that in order for AI to be a threat, it would need to have three things. It would need to be able to live in and among us, which we don't have yet, not quite, but I think there's a lot of development going on around the world. And it would need to have some sort of sentience or consciousness. And of course, that's, open to all sorts of debate, but from where I sit, consciousness, sentience, I mean, is that alive and well, as you say, in animals? Are plants sentient? I mean, what does our natural world look like? How are our systems built? And then, of course, this ability to make decisions, which are ultimately up to us in terms of who programs that. Who is the thinking mind or the human mind that's delved into philosophy and ethics and what have you, and is making those types of decisions. So, yeah, it's a question that is, I think, certainly that has kind of worked out in the autonomous car space as trial and error.
Right.
And statistically causes way less deaths than human beings do, because
right.
you say every person behind the wheel is sober, or perhaps not having some sort of a difficult day even, or perhaps is distracted, and as we well know, most accidents happen as a result of people being on their phones or looking at a screen, because we just can't multitask in that way. And then looking back at the business of warfare, I guess my deep curiosity around this is, what kind of questions do students have typically in a class? I mean, you land up in a philosophy class and you're at West Point. What are the questions that you might have? What are the concerns? What are the issues? What are people exploring in terms of futures? Is it something that students are fully aware of? Does it cause concern? I'd love to hear, Chris, your views on that.
We do. Our philosophy course that everyone takes, they start with a block on critical reasoning, then they go to general ethical theory, and then it ends with the ethics of war. And there's a bit of emerging technology and the ethics of war, so that they have thought about it. I think one thing is that you mentioned with the autonomous vehicles is, at what point do we deploy weapons? And I think, like you said, it's testing, and making sure that it's at least as reliable as humans, but ideally the bar would be it's more reliable than humans. And in warfare, that is able to distinguish combatants from non-combatants. Like, you wouldn't want it to not be able to do that as well as humans. So ideally, that would be one of the standards you use, is if the weapon is able to distinguish from combatants and non-combatants better than human beings. The question of who's responsible if the AI enabled weapon makes a mistake, is like that you just asked, is always, and again, I think it's really scenario based on what happened. But I think a big question is that a lot of people ask is it worse to be killed by a machine than by a human? Like, is it undermining human dignity to be decided to be killed by a machine than a human? And so that's always an interesting discussion, and there's various views on that. I mean, some people say, well,
sorry to interrupt you, Chris. What are your views? I mean, it's just got me thinking, but I'd love to hear.
I'm not sure it matters.
Right.
Well, obviously it doesn't matter for the person who's no longer there, but no, I'm not sure it matters. And in some ways, it's you could argue it might be more humane for the person who isn't required to make a decision to kill another human being. Like, in some ways, that's a positive thing, right? That you're not requiring someone to make a decision to kill another human being, and possibly return from warfare having this sort of moral injury that comes often with, even when it's a case where you're justified in targeting another person, the person who did it might still feel guilt and regret for doing so. So in some ways, yeah, I'm not sure. It might be even better that this happens. I know there's a lot of disagreement on that. Some people think it's that human life is so valuable, only a human being should be able to take it. But I'm not sure it matters as much as some think, morally speaking.
What do you
like to
think,
think,
Gina?
yeah,
I mean, your views on that. Yeah.
Yeah, love to hear. Yeah.
I see that once artificial intelligence becomes something that we can ultimately trust in, and because it will, if we train it right, we use good data, we unbias a lot of the data set, it will start to work the way we want it to, at least more the way we want it to, and not be so unpredictable. I want to believe that we will get there. And then I look at as artificial intelligence as a team member, so that every team member has a role to play. And we find a role that artificial intelligence plays for us to do all the things that you just said, that, it could free humans from some of the mental anguish of having to make those life and death decisions about other people, and then trust that the artificial intelligence, if that's its role, is doing it the way a person would do it. And then we trust that it's making the same moral and ethical decisions, and that it's only doing it when it's absolutely necessary, and not just, because it can. So those kinds of things, I think if we can get there, that's where we should want it to be. And then if it's part of a team, then the military commander ultimately has responsibility for it. That, you say that you can trust it because you understand a little bit better how it was trained, and maybe through testing, we've determined that the AI will largely do things the way we would want it to do, and it maybe become a little bit more predictable. So I would like to think that that's the ultimate form that it would take, and that it would just become another team member that ultimately falls under the command of the leader. And the interesting thing, and then Louise touched on this too, is that right now persons like you have the opportunity to help future military leaders to start thinking about these issues, or opportunities. Like how do students view working shoulder to shoulder, if you will, with an artificial intelligence? Do they see it as a team member? Do they see it as a weapon? Yeah, I'm curious.
Well, I think, look, a couple of things. I think what you said is really important. Like, we have to really have high standards before we just turn things loose, whether it's on the streets of a city or on a battlefield, and like the biases and the standards have to really be high. And then I think, like you said, once that happens, then there can be genuine trust to bring them into teams, and trust the decision-making ability of these things. But yeah, we really have to have high standards for enabling them. I mean, military units do train a lot with machines, and it's becoming more and more frequent just because of the nature of warfare and what's available. I mean, I think we see a lot of that going on in Ukraine with their use of technology generally. But I think you're right. I think it is up to leaders, especially, to have a general sense of how it works, how AI works, how it makes decisions, how the pitfalls, like the mistakes AI could make, and when you shouldn't use it and when you should use it, and then also being able to integrate these new team members into human teams, and so that humans and machines work well together, and then from there, like, understanding what is it that the human members of the team do best, and what is it that the AI does best. I mean, I think we use technology a lot more now, like, this, even with cell phones and GPS directions. I think we're used to teaming with, obviously not like really advanced AI, but we do use technology enough where I think the next generation of leaders will at least understand the importance of it. But again, I think you brought a good point about leaders do have to understand it and have to understand how it works when it doesn't work and those sorts of things so that they can employ it effectively within their teams.
I mean, I think that if you look at the way the military inspires law enforcement, just in general, at least in the United States, that technologies that are employed on the battlefield, sometimes they end up in the city and county police departments. And so it would be nice to have a tried and true and trusted artificial intelligence mechanism that is unbiased, that's undergone the rigors of war and it's well trusted, and then to hand that off so that smaller police organizations across the world can use these tools to save people's lives, to actually make life safer for people, and not the dark mirror, black mirror, whatever scenarios of the police state and the horrible things, the surveillance, because that's where people go. That's where writers go in science fiction. But there is also an opportunity, an equal opportunity to make things safer, better, if, like we talked about, the data becomes unbiased and the tool is developed in a way that's, we test it until we trust it to do the things the way we want it to do, instead of it being unpredictable in what it does. And then those tools become amazing lifesavers for both first responders and officers, to the people that are involved by, maybe there's a de-escalation process that happens with AI that's much more repeatable and trustworthy than people, because people are emotional and sometimes we make decisions that are based on maybe the wrong emotion or detecting emotions incorrectly. So what if we could get AIs to be better than us at helping to diffuse situations before they escalate into a war or into a crime? So I don't know. There's a part of me that's incredibly optimistic about this, but I don't know, Louise, maybe you have the opposite.
I'm just thinking there's the interesting thing about military use of AI and machines, right, is that there is a clear party to protect and there is a clear enemy. So it's all about, minimal risk to your own troops and your sovereignty and territory and all of these other things. And there is a clear enemy, and the intelligence behind it pinpoints what your strategy is and what you're optimized for and what you're going for. And, it's pretty clear. Then we sort of pull it back into police forces, or in the same way that any organization that actually has a crew rather than a team. So, very clear, which always works best in complexity, high pressure, stressful type situations that need quick response and very little discussion over decision making. So it could be medicine, it could be firefighting, it could be the police, it could be military, of course. And then we have to believe that the military have been working with AI and the ethics behind it for quite some time. The reality is that AI, as we know, is not about trialing. It's about trial and error.
Right. Yeah.
So we've got to actually shift our understanding of that a little, simply because the errors are being made where there might not be consequences. And then perhaps not as optimistic as you are there, Gina, pulling some of those models back into civilian life. And we also know that a tiny percentage, 18% of those young people who graduated in computer science last year, which means the years before that were less, and the year before that much less, etc., were women. The rest were young white, typically for the AI that we use in the Western world, American men with very little experience of the world or perhaps, not knocking them at all, but, cultural insensitivities that one might only get with age, time, and wisdom and a bit of travel. So when we look at how our systems are built and what we might extract out of the military for civilian use, I think that there is a great deal of caution needed, because bias is built into AI, full stop. And how it's constructed for the military, where you have one party to protect and another to eliminate, it might be very different from the kind of thinking and bias that we need to build into our civilian systems. So that's where my mind went, but possibly slightly.
No, I think that's like, when you think about ethics, just that again, the high standards of the importance of combatant, non-combatant distinction, and that is such a important ethical part of war, that even though humans make mistakes and sometimes intentionally do things, that you really have to make sure that AI is capable of doing that in all sorts of environments before you would trust it, to just go out and do things. But I did want to, I think, Louise, your comments reminded me, even as we allow AI to make decisions and we trust it more to make decisions, and we use those decisions, and sometimes we even use, we're given recommendations, when we're searching for something, and we often just go with the recommendation rather than keep searching, or we use GPS so much that we forget how to get somewhere on our own without using GPS. We do have to make sure that our leaders can still think in ways that that can kind of look at the decisions being made and just give them a second look to make sure that they're right. I mean, in some ways, it's like when our cadets do summer training, they're still trained on how to use a map and a compass, like a standard compass. And of course, they could use their phones and get from point A to point B. But one, they won't always have that technology, but also it's a very basic navigation skill. And so I think we do need to make sure that our leaders are able to audit the decisions of AI and make their own decisions, especially if AI were to be no longer available, but also just to make sure that it's doing the right thing.
Chris, do you think there's an opportunity when you and Louise are talking about leaders and leadership, as artificial intelligence becomes a bigger part of our lives in general, but especially when people's lives are at stake, that if you're in business school, maybe you take a business ethics class, and if you're in another, maybe engineering, maybe you get an ethics class. But do you think that there's an opportunity to have philosophy and ethics be a bigger part of a person, especially people that are future leaders, a bigger part of their education that isn't just a class, but maybe it's embedded into more of the curriculum, and even more so, it's even more important for people whose direct roles, as Louise pointed out, no matter who they are, if they're mostly a certain population making all the decisions about artificial intelligence, and then it applies to the rest of the world, then they probably need even more understanding of ethics and the philosophy of how we want to build an AI to be equitable and just, I guess, and maybe those aren't even the right words. Maybe there are more words. But what do you think about that? Do you see that happening? Do you see a trend? What are you doing as a professor to kind of build that?
I think ethical questions come up in a lot of different disciplines, like in history, for instance, whether related to technology or to other rights movements in the past. I think just by the very nature, you'll find ethical discussions are generated, or in a political science class that looks at the government and how it's done over time, or even economics or computer science, there's opportunities, and we do see them here, and I imagine at other institutions these discussions come up. But I guess you bring up a good point. They should be more they should be intentional, and faculty should really seek to foster those discussions rather than being coming up. Maybe they come up, maybe they don't, but I think there's so many natural opportunities in so many disciplines. I mean, even in a composition course, talking about the use of generative AI to write a paper brings up ethical issues about what's your own work and what isn't, and even the purpose of education, like, you know, the idea that writing can help you think and reflect your thinking. And so no, I can say I hope so, and I think it does happen a lot, but there's probably room to make more deliberate integration into those disciplines.
Well, Louise, you talked earlier about large language models and, you know, different countries that are creating their own. And for me, that just when you think about what you just said, Chris, about students using things like ChatGPT to write their papers. To me, if you're a leader and you're using AI to share your thoughts that aren't your thoughts, it's a little bit of a red flag. And I don't know, Louise, what are your thoughts on that, since you were talking about the large language models and how they might reshape warfare and things that impact countries?
Yeah, I think that without a doubt, we are lagging behind. I mean, of course, you know, with every discovery and, you know, the wonder of what we can actually do with technology and the science across the sciences, regulation, policy, you know, institutions are always slow, perhaps except for the military, who might already be employing, you know, these technologies ahead of the game, you know, in terms of mainstream. But the key here is that a lot of the tasks in jobs across all of the sectors and all of the disciplines and will be replaced by AI. And Gina, you made such a good point earlier about AI being a companion to our roles, you know, an intern to what we do, and you know, something that is there to actually assist us. And then what is the role of humans? It's to think. And if we're not embedding philosophy, ethics, you know, even if it's, you know, if somebody, of course, is working in computer science or studying computer science, I should say, you know, cyber ethics is a huge deal, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, warfare, ethics and warfare, AI, and anything to do with where an outcome impacts human lives. And, you know, one would argue that it doesn't matter whether you're an architect building a building, you know, of course, there are ethical considerations. And part of your job in the future, the tasks that are mundane and repetitive will be, AI will be your assistant. So I think we're a little slow in getting there because, and it's understandable, you know, institutions are slow to move, but we really are slow in getting there. And as people pick up these tools and try to weave them into their roles in different ways, we're seeing all sorts of things sparking. And it certainly isn't perfect. And as with any new thing, it probably doesn't need to be unless you've got human lives at stake. And fueling our minds, our ability to think critically and ethically, and, you know, you mentioned, you know, various different moral philosophies or ethics arenas. Chris, of course, we've got the rise of other things like care ethics, you know, as our populations grow, you know, older, although I see the US, you know, I'm about to say something which is sort of understood, but I see that the US, you know, average age is dropping at the moment. So I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, I think we've got to start urgently embedding critical thinking and ethics into absolutely everything that we do, because that'll be fundamentally what we humans need to do better, while AI does the mundane tasks and our roles. A very windy way of saying something quite simple. So forgive me, but I got there in the end. Yeah. So, Chris, are you? Is this something that you're experiencing within West Point? I mean, is it something that is being argued for? Is it? Are these questions that have come up? Is it?
No, no, they do. They have come up. Our policy, our academy policy on generative AI is, some have completely banned it, some institutions, but we haven't. Just because of everything you said, like there's going to be a need to use it. It's going to be present in performing the workplace tasks that you do, and so we do need our students to be able to learn how to use it, some familiarity, and use it for what it's good for, while at the same time developing the critical thinking and ethical reasoning abilities that you also mentioned. I'm actually surprised I haven't seen more academic programming related to human machine teaming, or even just maybe I'm just not looking, or even courses on how to bring large language models into the workplace and train your employees on how to use it to get the benefits of it. I just haven't seen much of that. I'm surprised there's not a lot more, because like you said, it's going to be such a powerful thing, and it'll free humans to do the higher level thinking. So I think that society-wide is a gap that we're seeing right now. Like how do you introduce this technology into your workplace? How do you get people to use it the right way and to benefit from it? I'm just surprised I haven't seen more of that. But again, maybe you have. Maybe I just haven't seen it.
Go ahead, Gina.
I've seen, for example, marketing, that sector, they've embraced ChatGPT and the like wholeheartedly. And there are tons of people out there talking about how to use it, what tools to use. They're creating their own content, not necessarily within a company, but individuals that are thought leaders in their industry are pushing forward and helping others in their industry understand how to use it, how to benefit from it. They're not laying off tons of people. They're literally helping other team members learn how to use it so that they can make better decisions, work faster, smarter. So in that sector, we're definitely seeing it. But across the board, you're probably right. I think a lot of people just think of it as, oh, it doesn't impact me, or yeah, it's okay there, but it doesn't have any impact here. Maybe there's denial. Maybe it's just people are so focused on the bottom line that they're not wanting to change how they work very much. In certain industries, right, especially big companies within certain industries, they have that momentum going, that corporate momentum, that they can continue making money the way they've always done for a long time. And even as things change, that momentum keeps them working. So they don't have to change right away. So they become a little bit more of a laggard. So I think there's, it's not across the board. It's just in certain areas, companies can afford to be a little slower to adopt. But I thought, bringing it back to leadership, even when we first started this conversation, we talked about the idea of a team member being not a person, and then the leader having to make decisions about how to employ that. So taking it out of the warfare context and putting it into the workplace context, that's more important than ever. It's leadership. So, Chris, you probably have the honor of teaching a lot of future military leaders, right, in your courses. And so they're all many of them, most of them will probably be leaders in whatever they do in their futures. So it's really important that someone like you with ethics and philosophy can help embody that for them. But I wonder, the opportunity is, and Louise, weigh in here on your thoughts. How much of leadership relies on these things, but yet leaders are not aware or think that they need ethics and philosophy as they start to think about artificial intelligence and how to use it. So I would say what's missing is you can't just grab a tool and start using it. You should be thinking of it through, if you're a leader, you should be thinking through the ethics around using it, understand the biases, understand how to question, critical thinking. So as it sounds like, as this artificial intelligence becomes more pervasive, leadership is going to become more important, and the quality of leaders is going to have to get better. I guess that's where I would plant my stake.
Yeah.
I like your stake, Gina. It's so interesting because, if I go into a C-suite team and work with a bunch of people and I mention the word ethics, people almost shut down. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And yet it's the foundation of all of their decision making. And how do we bring it alive for leaders? How do we actually, people are incredibly busy. Everybody's we know this, everybody's under extreme pressure to get stuff done and deliver, meet deadlines, hit milestones and their bonuses, at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Everybody has very clear objectives. And yet taking the time to actually examine our mental models or our lenses on the world, understanding how we actually evaluate things, how we think, and really taking a good look at what the balance of our roles is going to be in a very short period of time is not something that I would say a lot of leaders are taking the time out to actually have a look at. And yet those that do and start developing some future strategies around all of this. But I would say that, Gina, in terms of futures, right? I think are going to be so much better off. My greatest fear for leadership teams and leaders in general is that they're just going to simply slide into irrelevance. They're running at an incredible speed to get stuff done, and yet all of this other stuff is going on in parallel. And bit by bit, different departments are bringing in different tools and starting to use them, starting to develop them, but there's no one standard policy. There's no even, I would say generally in most organizations, a collective thinking around this or exploration about what kind of ethics does the organization want, in terms of what do they stand for? What is their purpose? Is it tied to their purpose and their mission and their vision? So I think that the shift in becoming purpose-driven organizations is where almost I see a split on the road for leaders and organizations in general, and it's happening very quickly. So concepts like not even concepts, very real living strategies like conscious business and conscious leadership have been popping for 12 years now, 14 years. And now we're only beginning to hear leaders, start talking about it, which is fantastic. And it's only, through the affordance of a pandemic and a series of events that's occurred in rapid succession over the last few years that have thrown us all into this world of complexity and uncertainty. And we only have to look at how people are coping, with around about 38% of people in business anyway reporting symptoms of burnout, and around 50% of Americans anyway, I'm not sure the stats anywhere else in the world, reporting mental health problems in the workplace. And that tells us a lot about the fact that people aren't coping particularly well. And surely if we had to wind it back to understanding ourselves better, looking at things like philosophy and ethics and what it means to be human in this world that will be what I'm thinking of as an AI-infused world, is vitally important, for our own well-being, who we are in the world, what we stand for, and how we express that through the work that we do, whether it's, in organizations or the military or anything else for that matter. So yeah, great point, Gina. I think this question of and are people capable? Perfectly. We're all incredible at, learning, unlearning, relearning. Our mental models kind of are those unconscious things that drive us. And yet, we often think of them as a hindrance. It's difficult to change. And yet one of our greatest capacities is the capacity to change. So we have to take all of this into balance. And I think that somehow bringing it to people's awareness as a critical part of business life, and I'm talking philosophy, ethics, understanding why we do what we do and what we need to develop to support that in, as you said, Gina, and you, Chris, in the way that we want to do it, is perfectly within our control. We have way more agency than we realize, and we have it now. We might not have it in a few years' time.
Yeah. I should note that we do have ethics embedded in obviously philosophy. The philosophy course here is kind of the foundation for it, but they encounter it in literature and the history course, and we have a military leadership course, the cyber courses. But I think it's important, and it's why we have a broad curriculum, but that leaders are able to look at issues from multiple perspectives. Ethics is like a prime one that they have to be able to look at, but also that they have to have some competence in technology. And it's why our philosophy majors take 3 engineering courses and 3 science courses and a bunch of math courses, and our engineers take philosophy and history and political science, international relations. So I think when leaders have a broad perspective and a foundation of different disciplinary views, when they look at something, they don't just think of it as strictly technological, but they think about the history of technology, the ethics, the societal impact. They might even think of a fictional account of how technology changed the world, and if that's relevant in the current situation. So that is something we think about a lot, and we think that a broad-based education, one that's got a really strong ethical component, is important for dealing with uncertainty and dealing with like rapidly changing world.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to bring this to a close. I think, Chris, what you just said is kind of the culmination of this whole conversation, is that the idea of ethics and humanities are important across the board, right? It's not just for people who want to be a humanities major. It should be embedded into all parts of disciplines, because it is, as Louise has mentioned as well, as artificial intelligence comes into more and more parts of our lives, we have to maintain our humanness, and we have to make human decisions, and not just say, oh, that technology is smarter, let's just relegate it to that. We have to maintain the human perspective on it, and maybe it's the most important part of anyone's job, whether you're an engineer, computer scientist, or a political scientist. Taking that human perspective is probably it should always be center stage. And I think what you said brings that together beautifully. Any thoughts on ending this, Louise? Any ending thoughts from you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed your comment as well, Chris. It just makes me think of sort of STEM moving to STEAM, and how this kind of thinking is starting to pop. If AI, well, we're seeing it already across all of the different disciplines, is already taking up major parts of engineers' jobs, or then of course the balance is always in how do we design it, and that of course comes down to the human beings doing the designing, so the being that drives the doing. And I think that your optimism is definitely something that I align with, Gina, when I think that my faith is always in human beings, and ultimately the goodness that lives everywhere. unfortunately, we don't see a lot of it in the news because it doesn't sell particularly well, but it's there, and people want to live decent lives and do the best they possibly can. And that I believe in 100%. We just need to help people, help leaders, certainly, or upcoming leaders, to have that balance of thinking, because the impact that they will have using these tools may be far more far-reaching than perhaps, you know, is realized today. And I think young people already have that. You know, they're already tuned in and tapped in, and are it's very much part of their lives. So perhaps we're the ones who need to learn from them. So, so I'll leave it at that. And Chris, any last thoughts before we?
No, thanks for a great conversation, but also really thank you for looking at these topics, because they're so important, and these type of conversations need to happen more often and need to be shared, and people, especially people in positions to make decisions, should be really thinking about this. So thanks for for the two of you for focusing your series on this important topic.